There are many famous and ancient mountains in the United States of America that attract millions of visitors every year. It's not surprising that some people come to disappear in these areas, but for a small number of people, the circumstances surrounding their disappearance manage to baffle law enforcement and professional searchers alike. Let's explore some of these. In June of 1982, 12-year-old Robert Balderschweiler and his parents had gone hiking in the Rocky Mountains National Park. The first I heard of Robert was from the Escanaba Daily Press paper, who didn't give much information, but stated that while in the park, Robert had ran ahead of his parents and turned a corner, and when they caught up to said corner, he'd vanished. At the time, they were somewhere between 10 and 12,000 feet in elevation. The story got picked up 2 days into the search effort. Bruising storms scoured Colorado with tornadoes, rain and hail, delaying the hunt for Robert. Record low temperatures are being reported here. The weather worsened into thunderstorms after Robert, who was only wearing light clothes and had no food with him, disappeared. This was particularly unfortunate because whatever Robert did after leaving his parents' sight, one way or another, he was barreling straight into an oncoming thunderstorm, which his parents only noticed once they had a better view of the sky. After realising this, they quickened their pace, which turned into a sprint in an attempt to catch up to Robert, but they just couldn't locate him. The search resumed just after daybreak for Robert, who disappeared during a hike with his family. Park officials suspended search efforts overnight, but left kerosene lamps at trailheads in hopes of attracting him. Glenn Kay, park spokesman, said, "We are focusing our efforts on some new ground. One possibility is that a brief storm that hit Flat Top Mountain may have driven him down the mountain and into the forest where he got lost." It's worth pointing out that this search began quickly after he disappeared, and the searchers expressed their bewilderment that they hadn't found any sign of him. They weren't sure how he'd managed to disappear so quickly and so completely. Because of the rains, which had softened the ground shortly after disappearing, they were hoping to find indications of his direction of travel in the form of footprints. But for one reason or another, he somehow had seemingly left none behind, or at least none that they could locate, which is surprising given the fact that they were in the exact spot that he disappeared from. To clarify also, there were 120 searchers in this area with 2 helicopters equipped with thermal imaging technology and a team of search dogs. Throughout the search, the helicopters only ever spotted animals with their cameras, and the dogs at no point picked up a scent. The tone around this disappearance came across as being highly unusual, and throughout the search, those looking for him described that they were confused. One professional searcher, Estes Park Explorer Scout Troop Leader, Jeff Shanhals, said the boy's disappearance is puzzling. It's so strange he could just disappear in such a populated area and still be alive. He then went on to say that it's difficult to imagine what actually went on, or how this may have happened in the first place, but he said that it's more likely that he's at the bottom of a crevice. This is something that the whole searching party took on board, and they were searching in these types of locations, but even so, a 4th day of searching produced no clues to the whereabouts of Robert. Glenn Kay said searchers continued their crisscross pattern over a 9 square mile area west of Bear Lake, while hunters used tracking dogs and helicopters to find him. After this day was over, and the 120 searchers still somehow couldn't find a single trace of Robert, a plea for help was put out, and this call was answered by over 130 extra personnel, consisting of firefighters and professional searchers, making the total number of searchers to over 250 people. The search organisers started to think outside the box and had brought in rock climbing teams. Obviously, it's very unlikely that Robert, who had no experience in climbing, decided to do so. But because they weren't finding anything at all, they scattered climbing teams around the area. Glenn Kay said the search was expanded in a desperate bid to locate Robert, it's become a critical situation. I don't want to put percentages on it, but this weekend may be our last to go. Military personnel from Fort Carson got involved and brought along a Chinook helicopter that they used to transport soldiers and searchers alike around the search zone. But despite this effort, it didn't bring them any closer to finding him. Historically, there's a high probability that kids of Robert's age will be found on average of 1.6 miles from the point where they were last seen. That method has had good results, so that's what we're concentrating on. We're focusing on finding him within a 2-mile radius of that point, but it's very frustrating because we've combed that area extensively already. It's also more common for young kids to go downhill. As a result of that fact, alongside the 2-mile area of focus, many of the searchers had also included a 10 square mile search downhill from the point Robert was last seen. Further confusion was expressed in later articles at the fact that no trace was being found at all. Glenn also said that one of the dogs who'd smelled Robert's clothing took off in a line but at some point stopped and began to circle as if it had lost the trail and was trying to pick it up again but never did. Fanning out from that spot provided no clues either. "We can't go on forever," said Glenn Kay. He said the 6-day effort, which cost more than $114,000, was one of the most expensive in the park's history. "We've combed the ice fields and rock ledges yard by yard. We've searched out the crevices," said Glenn Kay. Now, let's get bizarre. The body of a 12-year-old boy was found on a steep slope Sunday evening by park rangers 2 weeks after going missing. Robert's body was found at an elevation of 10,600 feet. Kay said the body was found about 800 feet west of Emerald Lake on a slope that had been searched several times before. It was again stated that it wasn't at all clear what happened in the first place, or how Robert had even got there, given that this area and surrounding areas were thoroughly searched multiple times throughout the duration of the search. This was the final piece of reporting on the incident, but Glenn Kay said that it was clear that a fall had been involved, but that they were waiting on the autopsy report to hopefully provide some context. There were no follow-up reports in the press, however, and to be clear, the area surrounding this slope, including above it, was searched and researched multiple times. It seems that because this area was the focus of repeated searches throughout the effort, and then Robert just so happens to be found in that exact spot weeks later, is what made this disappearance so odd. This mountain, especially overnight, was bitterly cold, and because Robert was only wearing light clothing, the thought process was that he wasn't going to be able to last more than 4 or 5 days. So to be found in that area 2 weeks later came as a shock, it seems. So, what happened here? I'm including the disappearance of Brennan Hawkins because in the previous video on the channel, I reported on a similar incident where a 12-year-old boy, Garrett Bardsley, also disappeared in almost the exact same area a year prior. I'll link to that video now in the top right of the screen and in the description in case you want to open a new tab. Similar to Garrett, Brennan was an 11-year-old Boy Scout when he disappeared from an elevation of 8,500 foot while at a scouting site in the high Uinta Mountains in Utah, around 80 miles east of Salt Lake City. On the 18th of June 2005, Brennan would find himself camping in the mountains with a friend of his. From what I'm able to ascertain, Brennan's friend's father was volunteering for the Boy Scout group the pair belonged to, and they decided to tag along with him together. While this is a wilderness area, I get the sense that at the time there were a fair few people around, as this volunteering session was for around 1,400 older scouts, though specific ages weren't mentioned. On the day of the disappearance, it appears that the pair split from the main crowd and went off to do their own thing. Brennan Hawkins was last seen Friday at a campground, struggling to remove gear near a wall for rock climbers. At the same time, a campground employee at the wall saw the boy's friend walking down a dirt road towards his family's campsite about 200 yards away. The employee looked away and then did not see either boy when he looked back. That was a particularly unfortunate set of circumstances to occur at the same time. It seems that the friend had had enough of rock climbing and was ready to go home, but it seems that Brennan was content to do his own thing. Meanwhile, the campground employee saw the moment of separation, looked away to continue doing whatever it was he was doing, then after looking back, both of them were gone. There was a stroke of luck for Brennan though, something Garrett didn't have when he went missing. There was already a large host of people in the immediate vicinity of the disappearance. Around 1,400 scouts, if I'm understanding correctly, which makes sense when you consider that the total number of searchers present was over 3,000, which is staggering. About 3,000 volunteers searched Sunday for Brennan, who was last seen near a climbing wall at an elevation of 8,500 feet. We look out into this darkness and somewhere my son is out there, said Brennan's father. Sheriff Dave Edmonds said searchers had turned up no evidence, but investigators remain hopeful that Brennan is simply lost. Interestingly, while this was going on, authorities began to investigate the possibility of foul play. It's fairly easy to understand why too. While you usually might not have reason to suspect this in a wilderness area, accounting for over 1,000 people in the vicinity presumably must change the likelihood somewhat. Secondarily to that is the fact that from Brennan's last known spot at the rock climbing wall, the Friends family's campsite was roughly 200 yards away from that spot, so this was very close. I wonder if because of that fact, the authorities might have questioned exactly how he could have become lost moments after his last sighting. Whatever the case may be, one way or another, it's interesting that foul play was being considered so early. That's not normally the case, or rather, it's not normally the case for it to be stated publicly. I'm sure that in a lot of disappearances that we've covered on the channel, in many instances, authorities were likely privately considering this as a possibility. In any case, despite filling the area with quite literally thousands of people, they weren't finding a single clue as to where Brennan might have gone, or what might have happened. Something that was quite heartwarming was the fact that Garrett Bardsley's father came back to this area that must hold some rather awful memories and joined the search for Brennan. 3 days into the search effort, search and rescue teams found 3 socks and a sandal in a swollen river nearby, but it was determined that none of the items belonged to Brennan and they weren't mentioned again. One Boy Scout advisor said that this incident was strange and that it left him baffled. He said that between the campsite and the rock climbing wall was an obvious dirt road. I can't fathom it because I know where he started and where he was supposed to end, said John M. Knight, a Boy Scout advisor from Brennan's hometown. There's no reason to believe he did anything other than walk on that road. The sheriff then stated that they still have nothing to go on at all, and while they didn't have a reason to suspect foul play, detectives were carrying out a background check on everyone who was at the camp. Now thankfully, unlike Garrett's disappearance, this one has a good ending and Brennan would be found 4 days into the search. Brennan survived for 4 days lost in Utah's rugged wilderness. He was found alive and in good condition, ending a massive rescue effort. The boy had no provisions with him when he disappeared and eagerly scarfed granola bars and guzzled bottles of water. The sheriff said Brennan was a little dehydrated, a little weak, but other than that, he was in very good health. This surprised a lot of the searchers who were stating that the situation was starting to become grim. Nobody expected him to be in good health anymore. He was also found 5 miles away from his starting location at Lily Lake. He didn't remember how he got there as he was dazed upon recovery. It was not immediately clear how he survived or whether he tried to find his way back to camp. Volunteer Forrest Nunley, a 43-year-old house painter from Salt Lake City, said he found Brennan standing in the middle of a trail. He was all muddy and wet. The boy saw some volunteer searchers on horseback, but he didn't want to come out. He was too scared, he was a little delirious. He was found on an ATV trail by a volunteer looking for him outside the search area. Brennan does not remember much of the 4 days he was missing, his parents said. They said they do not plan to push him to talk about his time in the woods. While it's strange that he doesn't remember much of his time spent missing, I'm just glad that he was found and returned safely. I'm sure that the family were desperate to know and understand some of the details, like what he might have been doing at night, though it is actually the best course not to push people, as these kinds of incidents can be very traumatic. It's best not to push and just let them talk about it if they want to. In any case, that's the end of the paper trail, so let's have a look at the final disappearance. Evan Thompson was 8 years old when he disappeared on a camping trip northwest of Cannon City in Colorado. The campground was at an elevation of over 7,000 feet and was described as being littered with steep limestone cliffs and narrow ravines. Evan himself had attention deficit disorder, and I'm not sure what the occasion was, but Evan was with family friends and a teacher. The first report comes 3 days into the search effort. Evan disappeared on the 27th of May 2006, and the first article I could find was written on the 30th. Searchers on Monday were hopeful that Evan could survive the elements 3 days after he disappeared while on a camping trip. Crews from 5 counties, the military, and the Civil Air Patrol were searching for Evan, who was last seen about 9:30 AM Saturday while camping. Searchers found fresh prints of the boy's Spider-Man shoes Sunday, and the area he was going was not interrupted by the sheer drop-offs. The land just sloped away over there. For the life of me, I don't know why he hasn't turned up. He's an 8-year-old kid. He's not going to be mobile much longer because he'll be too weak, said Steve Sperry, member of the El Paso County Search and Rescue Team. Just for extra clarity, it wasn't just professional search and rescuers involved, but the Air Force and National Guard were out looking too. Now, thankfully, Evan was found, but it wasn't without its peculiarities. Let's have a look. Evan was found alive after 4 days in a rugged area dotted with pine and juniper trees and creased by steep cliffs and narrow ravines. A search team on ATVs found Evan in an area called Hole in the Wall Gulch, almost 5 miles from where the boy wandered away from. The searchers who found him said that he was in exceptionally good condition, which was surprising to them. Evan was found at 4:20 PM in an area so remote and rugged. It took rescuers nearly 1.5 hours to bring him out to a staging area. Weirdly, searchers said that they didn't know how Evan had managed to reach this location, as it was 5 miles away from the campsite. And of course, you can't walk in a straight line in these areas, so it was estimated that he had likely walked approximately double that to get there. Evan was found inside a cave and didn't remember much about his ordeal. One report also stated that he was missing a shoe, but couldn't remember losing it. In the end, and while there isn't much more in the way of reporting, at least he was found, and we can end on a good note. So with that being said, I'd just like to take the time to thank you for watching, and a big thank you to the patrons who've been running around and disappearing on the screen. If you found the video interesting, then please do leave a like, hit the bell, and subscribe if you haven't already. If not, then feel free to leave a dislike. I'm just looking for your honest opinion either way. I hope that you've had a great day, or evening depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe guys. Peace.